Welcome back to everyone tuning in to Ismaili Dialogue. Feels good to be back for our second deep dive.
Yeah, Ali Madad, glad to be here.
So our first deep dive, if you remember it, was all about the oneness of God. It's a really good one to start with, a foundational concept to build on. But today, we're kind of moving forward with Ismaili theology. We're going to be exploring the Imamat.
The Imamat, yeah.
And when you really understand this concept of the Imamat, it's such a unifying force under that umbrella of the divine.
Yes, absolutely. And a concept that is so important and so deeply ingrained in the Ismaili tradition and connects us to this lineage of spiritual guidance.
So if someone is hearing the word Imak for the first time, where do we even begin? Like, what is that core idea here?
Well, the Imamat is about divinely appointed leadership in matters of faith, and this leadership is passed down hereditarily through the family of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Through the family of the Prophet Muhammad. So not just any leadership, but we're talking about a direct lineage from the Prophet himself. That ensures a connection to the source of the faith.
Exactly. And I think the word imam actually gives us clues. It comes from the Arabic root amma, meaning to come before.
Okay.
And right away, that gives us a sense of someone leading the way, guiding others.
It makes me think about words like for mother and ummah for community.
Wow. Yeah.
There's a sense of nurturing, like leading with care and wisdom when I think about those words.
That is such a beautiful linguistic connection that you've just made, because it's very true. The imam is someone who embodies those qualities, nurturing the community, leading them towards spiritual understanding.
Okay.
But, you know, it's wonderful because the term imam is really layered. It can also signify an example, a model, even a path. So all of this points to the idea of someone showing the way.
Okay, so we see that leadership aspect very clearly. But how is that different from the role of a prophet like Muhammad or a messenger? Don't they lead as well?
They do, but that is a very crucial question, and one that the Qur'an itself helps us kind of unpack. So prophets and messengers, Nabi and Rasul in Arabic, they have a specific function. Their primary role is to convey God's message.
Okay.
So, you know, they deliver warnings, revelations, divine news. So think of them as the bringers of the word.
So they're the initial point of contact
Yes.
between the divine and humanity. But what happens after that initial revelation? Is that where the imam comes in?
Exactly. So the imam's role goes beyond simply conveying the message. They're entrusted with providing continuous guidance, interpreting the message for the community, and ensuring its proper application. And this is a role that comes with immense responsibility. They are seen as living examples, performing good works, passing judgments, even acting as witnesses on the day of judgment.
Wow, that paints a much broader picture than just conveying an initial message.
Exactly, yeah. And I think to illustrate this further, the Quran offers some very powerful examples. So consider Abraham, for example, who is considered the first imam. He was appointed by God, not just for his people, but for all of humanity. And what's crucial here is that God promised that leadership would continue through his righteous progeny. We see this in verse 2.124.
So it's not just about an individual, but about a lineage, a continuous chain of guidance that is passed down through generations.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
It is, and it connects beautifully with this idea of sunnah, you know, God's unchanging custom. So the Quran repeatedly emphasizes that God's ways are consistent. If God consistently appointed successors from the families of prophets before Muhammad, as we see with Abraham, Noah, Moses, why would this pattern suddenly change after him? That's a question posed in verse 33.62.
If the Quran itself highlights this consistency and challenges us to think about God's unchanging ways,
Exactly.
it seems almost illogical to assume that that pattern would just stop.
Exactly. And it doesn't just pose that question, it offers these very compelling examples. You know, we can take Abraham's sons, Isaac and Jacob, for example, both explicitly referred to as imams who guide by our command in verse 21.73. And that phrasing, by amrina, meaning by our command, is so crucial here.
Why is that phrasing so significant?
Because it points to a direct link to the divine will.
Okay.
You know, it's not just guidance, it's guidance directly from God, signifying this authority that goes beyond just human leadership.
So it's like they're acting as conduits for God's will, ensuring the message remains pure and true.
Exactly. And it's not an isolated case. You know, verse 32.24 mentions imams among the children of Israel, guiding alongside the kitab, God's decree or guidance.
Okay.
So again, it's furthering this idea of continuous divinely appointed leadership.
So we're starting to see a pattern emerge here.
Yes.
Of chosen individuals, descendants of prophets, who are entrusted with carrying on the divine legacy.
Exactly. And that pattern becomes even more compelling when we consider a specific term in the Quran. ulul aminu.
Ulu Amir. What does that mean? And how does that connect to all this?
It means possessors of authority, and verse 4.59 instructs believers, obey God, obey the messenger, and obey the ulu amir amongst you. Notice anything interesting about that phrasing?
Hold on. It's using a single obey for God, the messenger, and the Ulul Amir.
Exactly, yeah.
It's almost like it's suggesting they hold a similar level of authority.
That is precisely the implication. And when we connect this back to the imams who are described as guiding by God's command, this really fascinating connection emerges. And it suggests that Ulu Amir, like the imams, hold an authority that flows directly from the divine will.
Okay, so they're not just leaders in a worldly sense.
Exactly.
But figures whose authority is rooted in something much higher.
Exactly. And to solidify this concept even further, let's look at how the Qur'an actually emphasizes the special status of prophets' families and descendants.
Okay, how does it highlight their importance?
Well, it uses specific terms like al-turiya, and korba. And this is used over 100 times to denote their unique position. For instance, verse 3.3334 describes Adam and Noah being succeeded by the progeny of Abraham and Imran, suggesting this unbroken line of divinely chosen leadership.
So, again, it's not just about the individual prophets, it's about the lineage.
Exactly.
The family who is entrusted with carrying on the divine mission.
Precisely. And it gets even more specific. So verse 57.26 states that prophethood and the kitab, God's decree, were bestowed upon the descendants, Turiya, of Noah and Abraham, again highlighting the importance of lineage.
Wow, so much weight is placed on these specific families. Are there other examples in the Quran?
Oh, there are many. So in verses 4.54 and 29.27, we see that Abraham's progeny is granted the kitab, wisdom, al-hikmah, and a great kingdom, mulk azim. Joseph, in 12.6, is favored like his forefathers, showing God's favor on the house of Jacob.
It's this consistent thread. It's not just about leadership. It's about wisdom, knowledge, even kingdoms that are being passed down through these lineages.
And it goes beyond just inheritance, you know? These verses actually point to a deliberate choice by God to entrust certain families with carrying forward this divine message and guidance.
So if we're seeing this pattern of God choosing specific descendants, wouldn't it make sense for Muhammad to follow suit?
That's a fascinating question. And it brings us to the heart of the Ismaili understanding of the Imamat.
You know, this all makes me think about, because some scholars argue that the Quran is essentially like a reflection of Muhammad's own thoughts. Does that then diminish the concept of divine revelation? Or could it actually support the idea that he intended for his family to succeed him, just like the prophets that came before him?
That's a really profound question, and I think that's a question that deserves its own deep dive, actually.
Right.
But what's really fascinating is, you know, even if we entertain this idea that the Quran represents Muhammad's thoughts, it still kind of points to the same conclusion. You know, if he saw this pattern throughout prophetic history, wouldn't he naturally see his own family as continuing that lineage?
Right.
After all, the Quran depicts prophets praying for their offspring to inherit this leadership, this wisdom, and divine legacy.
Okay.
Why would Muhammad be any different?
It's almost like a paradox.
Yeah.
Whether we view the Quran as purely divine revelation or a combination of divine inspiration and Muhammad's own thoughts, it seems to point to the same conclusion. This importance of that continued lineage.
Exactly. And that's a cornerstone of Ismaili theology, this concept of family, of a lineage entrusted with carrying the light of guidance. It's woven into the very fabric of our faith.
This is also thought-provoking. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's just pause here for a moment.
Okay.
We unpacked the Quranic foundations, but how does this lineage actually play out specifically within Ismailism? That's a story for part 2.
Welcome.
It's fascinating, isn't it? In part 1, we really dug deep into the Quranic evidence and uncovered this pattern of God choosing the descendants of prophets to carry on the divine message.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of eager to see how that lineage unfolds specifically within Ismailism.
Absolutely. So for Ismailis, the Imamat isn't just a historical concept. It's a living, breathing reality.
Okay.
We believe that this line of imams continues unbroken from the Prophet Muhammad through his cousin and son-in-law Ali,
Okay.
and then through Ali's descendants.
So it's not just a theoretical concept, but an active lineage that exists to this day.
Precisely. Each imam inherits the spiritual authority and guidance of the previous one, ensuring that unbroken chain connecting us back to the source of the faith.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm struggling a bit to grasp what that means practically.
Yeah.
You know, what role does the imam play in the lives of Ismailis today? It's not like they're ruling kingdoms anymore, right?
You're right, the Imam's role has evolved over time, but their significance remains profound. For Ismailis, the Imam is a living guide, a source of spiritual direction and inspiration.
So it's a personal connection.
Yes.
An ongoing relationship with a living spiritual leader.
Yeah.
That's so different from how so many other faiths operate.
It is. The Imam's guidance isn't just about rituals and doctrines.
Yeah.
It's about navigating the complexities of life, finding meaning and purpose.
Okay, so how does that guidance manifest? What does it look like in practice?
Well, the Imam offers interpretations of the faith,
Okay.
helping us apply its teachings to the challenges of the modern world. They address social issues, promote ethical and moral living, and inspire us to live lives of service to humanity.
So it sounds incredibly powerful, having that kind of direct connection to a living guide, someone who's actively engaged in helping you navigate life's complexities.
It is a profoundly personal connection.
Yeah.
One that's deeply cherished by Ismailis worldwide.
In part one, we talked about the Quranic emphasis on prophets' descendants inheriting not just leadership, but wisdom, knowledge, even kingdoms. Is that something that's reflected in the Ismaili Imamat?
Absolutely. While the Imams no longer hold political authority in the traditional sense, this concept of inheriting wisdom and knowledge is central to our understanding of the Imamat.
So it's not just about lineage, it's about inheriting a spiritual legacy.
Yes.
A deep understanding of the faith that's passed down through generations.
Precisely. And that's what makes it such a unifying force.
Yeah.
It connects Ismailis across the globe, fostering a sense of shared identity and purpose.
It's amazing to think about. This concept, rooted in centuries of history, still resonates so deeply with people today. It speaks to something fundamental about the human experience, doesn't it? This need for connection, for guidance, for something that transcends the material world.
You've hit on something profound. This human search for meaning and purpose is timeless.
Yeah.
And the Imamat offers a framework, a path to navigate that search.
It's like a compass.
Yes.
Pointing us towards a life of meaning and spiritual fulfillment.
A beautiful way to put it. It's a compass that's guided Ismailis for centuries and continues to guide us today.
This is all so insightful. We've gone from the Quranic roots to the lived reality for Ismailis today. But I have to ask, we focused on the Ismaili perspective here. I'm aware that other Muslim groups have different views on the Imamat.
Yeah.
Can you kind of shed some light on those differing interpretations?
Of course. It's important to acknowledge the diversity of thought within Islam.
Okay.
So while Ismailis believe in this continuous hereditary of life, Imamat descended from the Prophet, other groups have differing views.
So there's no one-size-fits-all understanding of the Imamat within Islam.
Exactly. For example, some groups believe that the Imamat ended with Ali. Others recognize a succession of imams, but with a different lineage than the Ismaili tradition.
Okay.
And there are those who see the Imamat as a primarily political role rather than a spiritual one.
So even within a shared faith, there can be this wide range of interpretations on such fundamental concepts.
That's right. And that diversity of thought is part of what makes Islam such a rich and complex tapestry.
It reminds me of something we talked about in part one, the idea that even if we view the Qur'an as reflecting Muhammad's own thoughts, it still points towards the importance of lineage, of continuing that prophetic legacy.
That's a wonderful connection. It highlights the idea that there are multiple ways to approach these concepts.
Okay.
And that engaging with different perspectives can actually enrich our own understanding.
Absolutely. And that brings up an important point for our listeners. When encountering different perspectives, especially within a faith tradition, it's so crucial to approach them with respect and a willingness to learn.
I couldn't agree more. Understanding the nuances of different viewpoints, even those we might not personally agree with, can deepen our appreciation for the richness and complexity of faith. It's about building bridges of understanding.
Beautifully said. So while we've delved deep into the Imamat from the Ismaili perspective today, it's important to remember that this is just one thread in a much larger tapestry of Islamic thought.
And that tapestry is woven with diverse colors and patterns, each contributing to the beauty and depth of the whole.
It's been an incredible journey so far, exploring the Imamat from its Quranic foundations to its significance for Ismailis today.
Yes.
But our deep dive isn't over yet. We'll be back for part 3, where we'll delve into some final reflections and leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder. Welcome back to Ismaili Dialogue for the final part of our deep dive. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. We've covered so much ground, from those Quranic roots of the Imamat to its living reality for Ismailis today.
And we even, ventured into that broader landscape of Islamic thought, acknowledging the diverse interpretations of this concept.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's about recognizing that richness and complexity of faith traditions and approaching those different perspectives with respect and an open mind.
Beautifully said. But before we wrap up, I'd love to bring it back to our listeners. What's that one key takeaway you want them to leave with today?
What's truly fascinating about this whole discussion is that regardless of one's specific beliefs, this whole concept of the Imamat invites us to reflect on a fundamental human question. What guides us in life? Where do we find our moral compass, our sense of purpose, our connection to something greater than ourselves?
That's such a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it's something we all grapple with, whether consciously or not.
Exactly. And the Imamat, in its various interpretations, offers one possible answer, a framework for understanding our place in the universe and our responsibility to one another.
It provides that sense of direction,
Yeah,
a path to follow amidst the complexities of life.
precisely. And whether or not one subscribes to the specific beliefs of any particular tradition, this underlying quest for guidance, for meaning, for connection, it's something we all share.
It's a universal human experience, this yearning for something beyond the material world.
And that yearning in itself is something worth exploring.
Absolutely. So, as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. Take some time to reflect on your own personal sources of guidance and inspiration.
Yes.
What shapes your values, your choices, your understanding of the world?
And how can those sources help you navigate the challenges and opportunities that life inevitably throws your way?
These are questions worth pondering, and they might just lead you on your own personal journey of discovery. Ya Ali Madad.